He was President of the United States and father to 6 boisterous children who shared his enthusiasm and zest for life. I'm Pat Tully of the Ketchikan Public Library, and this is Reading Aloud. This evening I'm going to read selected letters by Theodore Roosevelt to and about his children. These letters were written between 1901 and 1904 when his oldest children were teenagers. The children from oldest to youngest are Alice, Ted, Kermit, Ethel, Archie, and Quentin. Roosevelt wrote just the way you'd expect him to write, with great energy and positivity about the family's daily life and especially about their adventures with their many animals, which included horses, dogs, cats, snakes, and other interesting pets. So let's get started. This was written from Oyster Bay on May 7th, 1901. Blessed Ted, it was the greatest fun seeing you, and I really had a satisfactory time with you, and came away feeling that you were doing well. I am entirely satisfied with your standing, both in your studies and in athletics. I want you to do well in your sports, and I want even more to have you do well with your books, but I do not expect you to stand first in either, if so to stand would cause you overwork and hurt your health. I always believe in going hard at everything, whether it is Latin or mathematics, boxing or football. But at the same time, I want to keep this sense of proportion. It is never worthwhile to absolutely exhaust oneself or to take big chances unless for an adequate object. I want you to keep in training the faculties which would make you, if the need arose, able to put your last ounce of pluck and strength into a contest. But I do not want you to squander these qualities. To have you play football as well as you do, and make a good name in boxing and wrestling, and be cocks of your second crew, and stand second or third in your class in your studies, is all right. I should be rather sorry to see you drop too near the middle of your class, because as you cannot enter college until you're 19, and will therefore be a year later in entering life, I want you to be prepared in the best possible way, so as to make up for the delay. But I know that all you can do, you will do, to keep substantially the position in the class that you have so far kept, and I have entire trust in you, for you have always deserved it. The weather has been lovely here. The cherry trees are in full bloom, the peach trees just opening, while the apples will not be out for 10 days. The mayflowers and bloodroot have gone, the anemones and bellwort have come, and the violets are coming. All the birds are here, pretty much, and the warblers troop through the woods. To my delight, yesterday Kermit, when I tried him on Diamond, did excellently. He has evidently turned the corner in his writing, and was just as much at home as possible, although he was on my saddle with his feet thrust in the leathers above the stirrup. Poor mother has had a hard time with Yanka, for she rubbed her back, and as she sadly needs exercise and I could not have a saddle put upon her, I took her out bareback yesterday. Her gaits are so easy that it is really more comfortable to ride her without a saddle than to ride Texas with one, and I gave her 3 miles sharp cantering and trotting. Dewey Jr. is a very cunning white guinea pig. I wish you could see Kermit taking out Dewey Sr. and Bob Evans to spend the day on the grass. Archie is the sweetest little fellow imaginable. He is always thinking of you. He has now struck up a great friendship with Nicholas, rather to Mame's, who's the nurse, is regret, as Mame would like to keep him purely for Quentin. The last-named small, boisterous person was in fearful disgrace this morning, having flung a block at his mother's head. It was done in sheer playfulness, but of course could not be passed over lightly, and after the enormity of the crime had been brought fully home to him, he fled with howls of anguish to me, and lay in an abandon of yellow-headed grief in my arms. Ethel was earning money for the purchase of the art magazine by industriously hoeing up the weeds in the walk. Alice is going to ride Yajenka bareback this afternoon, while I try to teach Ethel on Diamond, after Kermit has had his ride. Yesterday at dinner we were talking of how badly poor Mrs. Blank looked, and Kermit suddenly observed in an aside to Ethel, entirely unconscious that we were listening, "Oh, Ethel, I tell you what Mrs. Blank looked like Davis's hen that died. You know, the one that couldn't hop up on the perch." Naturally, this is a purely private anecdote. Oyster Bay, May 7th, 1901. Blessed Ted. Recently I've gone to play with Archie and Quentin after they have gone to bed, and they have grown to expect me, jumping up very soft and warm in their tommies, expecting me to roll them over on the bed and tickle and grabble in them. However, it has proved rather too exciting, and an edict has gone forth that hereafter I must play bear with them before supper, and give up the play when they have gone to bed. Today was Archie's birthday, and Quentin resented Archie's having presents, while he, Quentin, had none. With the appalling frankness of 3 years old, he remarked with great sincerity that it made him miserable, and when taken to task for his lack of altruistic spirit, he expressed an obviously perfunctory repentance and said, "Well, boys must lend boys things at any rate." White House, October 13th, 1902. Blessed Kermit. I am delighted at all the accounts I receive of how you are doing at Groton. You seem to be enjoying yourself and are getting on well. I need not tell you to do your best to cultivate ability for concentrating your thought on whatever work you are given to do. You will need it in Latin especially. Who plays opposite you at end? Do you find you can get down well under the ball to tackle the fullback? How are you tackling? Mother is going to present Jem to Uncle Will. She told him she did not think he was a good dog for the city, and therefore she gives him up to Uncle Will to keep in the city. Uncle Will's emotion at such self-denying generosity almost overcame him. Jem is really a nice small bow wow, but Mother found that in this case possession was less attractive than pursuit. When she takes him out walking, he carries her along as if she was a Roman chariot. She thinks that Uncle Will or Ida can anchor him. Yesterday she and Ethel held him and got the burrs out of his hair. It was a lively time for all three. 2. Master James A. Garfield, Washington. This would be President Garfield's grandson. From the White House, December 26, 1902. Jimmykins. Among all the presents I got, I don't think there was one I appreciated more than yours. For I was brought up to admire and respect your grandfather, and I have a very, very great fondness and esteem for your father. It always seems to me as if you children were being brought up the way that mine are. Yesterday Archie got among his presents a small rifle from me and a pair of riding boots from his mother. He won't be able to use the rifle until next summer, but he has gone off very happy in the riding boots for a ride on the calico pony Algonquin, the one you rode the other day. Yesterday morning at 6:45, all the children were up and dressed and began to hammer at the door of their mother and my room, in which their 6 stockings, all bulging out with queer angles and rotundities, were hanging from the fireplace. So their mother and I got up, shut the window, lit the fire, taking down the stockings, of course, put on our wrappers, and prepared to admit the children. But first there was a surprise for me, also for their good mother, for Archie had a little Christmas tree of his own which he had rigged up with the help of one of the carpenters in a big closet, and we all had to look at the tree, and each of us got a present of it. There was also one present each for Jack the dog, Tom Quartz the kitten, Algonquin the pony, whom Archie would no more think of neglecting than I would neglect his brothers and sisters. Then all the children came into our bed, and there they opened their stockings. Afterwards we got dressed and took breakfast, and then all went into the library, where each child had a table set for his bigger presents. Quentin had a perfectly delightful electric railroad, which had been rigged up for him by one of his friends, the White House electrician, who has been very good to all the children. Then Ted and I, with General Wood and Mr. Bob Ferguson, who was a lieutenant in my regiment, went out for a 3-hour ride. And all of us, including all the children, took lunch at the house with the children's aunt, Mrs. Captain Cowles. Archie and Quentin having their lunch at a little table with their cousin, Sheffield. Late in the afternoon, I played at single stick with General Wood and Mr. Ferguson. I'm going to get your father to come on and try it soon. We have to try to hit as light as possible, but sometimes we hit hard, and today I have a bump over one eye and a swollen wrist. Then all our family and kinsfolk and Senator and Mrs. Lodge's family and kinsfolk had our Christmas dinner at the White House, and afterwards danced in the East Room, closing up with the Virginia Reel. From the White House, January 6, 1903. Dear Kermit, we felt very melancholy after you and Ted left, and the house seemed empty and lonely. But it was the greatest possible comfort to feel that you both really have enjoyed school and are both doing well there. Tom Quartz is certainly the cunningest kitten I have ever seen. He is always playing pranks on Jack, and I get very nervous lest Jack should grow too irritated. The other evening they were both in the library, Jack sleeping before the fire, Tom Quartz scampering about, an exceedingly playful little wild creature, which is about what he is. He would race across the floor, then jump upon the curtain or play with the tassel. Suddenly he spied Jack and galloped up to him. Jack, looking exceedingly sullen and shamefaced, jumped out of the way and got upon the sofa, where Tom Quartz instantly jumped upon him again. Jack suddenly shifted to the other sofa, where Tom Quartz again went after him. Then Jack started for the door, while Tom made a rapid turn under the sofa and around the table, and just as Jack reached the door, leaped upon his hindquarters. Jack bounded forward and away, and the two went tandem out of the room, Jack not reappearing at all, and after about 5 minutes Tom Quartz stalked solemnly back. Another evening, the next speaker of the house, Mr. Cannon, an exceedingly solemn elderly gentleman with chin whiskers, who certainly does not look to be of a playful nature, came to call upon me. He is a great friend of mine, and we sat talking over what our policy for the session should be until about 11 o'clock, and when he went away I accompanied him to the head of the stairs. He had gone about halfway down when Tom Quartz strolled by, his tail erect and very fluffy. He spied Mr. Cannon going down the stairs, jumped to the conclusion that he was a playmate escaping, and raced after him, suddenly grasping him by the leg the way he does Archie and Quentin when they play hide-and-seek with him. Then, loosening his hold, he tore downstairs ahead of Mr. Cannon, who eyed him with iron calm and not one particle of surprise. Ethel has reluctantly gone back to boarding school. It is just after lunch, and Delaney is cutting my hair while I dictate this to Mr. Loeb. I left Mother lying on the sofa and reading aloud to Quentin, who as usual has hung himself over the back of the sofa in what I would personally regard as an exceedingly uncomfortable attitude to listen to literature. Archie we shall not see until this evening, when he will suddenly challenge me either to a race or a bear play, and if neither invitation is accepted, will then propose that I tell a pig story or else read aloud from the Norse folk tales. To Miss Emily T. Caro, who is his sister-in-law, Oyster Bay, August 6, 1903. Today is Edith's birthday, and the children have been too cunning in celebrating it. Ethel had hem-stitched a little handkerchief herself, and she had taken her gift and the gifts of all the other children into her room and neatly wrapped them up in white paper and tied with ribbons. They were for the most part taken downstairs and put at her plate at breakfast time. Then at lunch in marched Kermit and Ethel with a cake, burning 42 candles, and each candle with a piece of paper tied to it, purporting to show the animal or inanimate object from which the candle came. All the dogs and horses, Renown, Blystene, Gigenta, Algonquin, Sailor Boar, Briar, Hector, etc., as well as Tom Quartz the cat, the extraordinarily named hens, such as Baron Speckle and Fierce, and finally even the boats and that pomegranate, which Edith gave Kermit and which has always been known as Santiago, had each his or her or its tag on a special candle. Edith is very well this summer and looks so young and pretty. She rides with us a great deal and loves Yagenta as much as ever. We also go out rowing together, taking our lunch and a book or two with us. The children fairly worship her, as they ought to, for a more devoted mother was never known. The children themselves are as cunning and good as possible. Ted is nearly as tall as I am and as tough and wiry as you can imagine. He is really a good rider and can hold his own in walking, running, swimming, shooting, wrestling, and boxing. Kermit is as cunning as ever and has developed greatly. He and his inseparable Philip started out for a night's camping in their best the other day. A driving storm came up and they had to put back, really showing both pluck, skill, and judgment. They reached home after having been out 12 hours at 9 in the evening. Archie continues devoted to Algonquin and to Nicholas. Ted's playmates are George and Jack, Alec Russell, who is in Princeton, and Ensign Hammer of the Sylph. They wrestle, shoot, swim, play tennis, and go off on long expeditions in the boats. Quentiqui has cast off the trammels of the nursery and become a most active and fearless, though very good-tempered little boy. Really, the children do have an ideal time out here, and it is an ideal place for them. The 3 sets of cousins are always together. I am rather disconcerted by the fact that they persist in regarding me as a playmate. This afternoon, for instance, was rainy, and all of them, from George, Ted, Lorraine, and Ethel, down to Archibald, Nicholas, and Quentin, with the addition of Alec Russell and Ensign Hammer, came to me to get me to play with them in the old barn. They pled so hard that I finally gave in, but upon my word, I hardly knew whether it was quite right for the president to be engaged in such wild romping as the next 2 hours saw. The barn is filled with hay, and of course meets every requirement for the most active species of hide-and-seek and the like. Quentin enjoyed the game as much as anyone, and would jump down from one hay level to another 15 feet below with complete abandon. I took Kermit and Archie, with Philip, Oliver, and Nicholas, out for a night's camping in the 2 rowboats last week. They enjoyed themselves heartily, as usual, each sleeping rolled up in his blanket, and all getting up at an unearthly hour. Also, as usual, they displayed a touching and firm conviction that my cooking is unequaled. It was of a simple character, consisted of frying beefsteak first and then potatoes and bacon fat over the campfire. But they certainly ate in a way that showed their words were not uttered in a spirit of empty compliment. Oyster Bay, September 23rd, 1903. Blessed Kermit. The house seems very empty without you and Ted, although I cannot conscientiously say that it is quiet. Archie and Quentin attend to that. Archie, barefooted, bareheaded, with his usual faded blue overalls, much torn and patched, has just returned from a morning with his beloved Nick. Quentin has passed the morning in sports and pastimes with the long-suffering Secret Service men. Alan has been associating closely with Mother and me. Yesterday, Ethel went off riding with Lorraine. She rode Wyoming, who is really turning out a very good family horse. This evening I expect Grant Lafarge and Owen Wister, who are coming to spend the night. Mother is as busy as possible putting up the house, and Ethel and I insist that she now eyes us both with a purely professional gaze, and secretly wishes she could wrap us up in a neatly pinned sheet with camphor balls inside. Goodbye, blessed fellow. From the White House, October 2nd, 1903. Dear Kermit, I was very glad to get your letter. Am glad you are playing football. I should be very sorry to see either you or Ted devoting most of your attention to athletics, and I haven't got any special ambition to see you shine overmuch in athletics in college, at least if you go there, because I think it tends to take up too much time. but I do like to feel that you are manly and able to hold your own in rough, hardy sports. I would rather have a boy of mine stand high in his studies than high in athletics, but I could a great deal rather have him show true manliness of character than show either intellectual or physical prowess. And I believe you and Ted both bid fair to develop just such character. There! You will think this a dreadfully preaching letter. I suppose I have a natural tendency to preach just at present because I am overwhelmed with my work. I enjoy being president, and I like to do the work and have my hand on the lever. But it is very worrying and puzzling, and I have to make up my mind to accept every kind of attack and misrepresentation. It is a great comfort to me to read the life and letters of Abraham Lincoln. I am more and more impressed every day, not only with the man's wonderful power and sagacity, but with his literally endless patience, and at the same time his unflinching resolution. From the White House, October 4th, 1903. Dear Ted, in spite of the hurry, hurry on the outside of your envelope, I did not like to act until I had consulted Mother and thought the matter over. And to be frank with you, old fellow, I am by no means sure that I am doing right now. If it were not that I feel you will be so bitterly disappointed, I would strongly advocate your acquiescing in the decision to leave you off the second squad this year. I am proud of your pluck, and I greatly admire football, though it was not a game I was ever able to play myself, my qualities resembling Kermit's rather than yours. But the very things that make a good game make it a rough game, and there is always the chance of your being laid up. Now, I should not in the least object to your being laid up for a season if you were striving for something worthwhile, to get on the Groton school team, for instance, or on your class team when you entered Harvard. For of course I don't think you will have the weight to entitle you to try for the varsity. But I am by no means sure that it is worth your while to run the risk of being laid up for the sake of playing in the second squad when you are a fourth former, instead of when you are a fifth former. I do not know that the risk is balanced by the reward. However, I have told the rector that as you feel so strongly about it, I think that the chance of your damaging yourself in body is outweighed by the possibility of bitterness of spirit if you could not play. Understand me, I should think mighty little of you if you permitted chagrin to make you bitter on some point where it was evidently right for you to suffer the chagrin. But in this case I am uncertain, and I shall give you the benefit of the doubt. If, however, the coach has at any time come to the conclusion that you ought not to be on the second squad, why you must come off without grumbling. I am delighted to have you play football. I believe in rough, manly sports, but I do not believe in them if they degenerate into the sole end of anyone's existence. I don't want you to sacrifice standing well in your studies to any over-athleticism. And I need not tell you that character counts for a great deal more than either intellect or body in winning success in life. Athletic proficiency is a mighty good servant, and like so many other good servants, a mighty bad master. Did you ever read Pliny's letter to Trajan, in which he speaks of its being advisable to keep the Greeks absorbed in athletics because it distracted their minds from all serious pursuits, including soldiering, and prevented their ever being dangerous to the Romans? I have not a doubt that the British officers in the Boer War had their efficiency partly reduced because they had sacrificed their legitimate duties to an inordinate and ridiculous love of sports. A man must develop his physical prowess up to a point, but after he has reached that point, there are other things that count more. In my regiment, 9/10 of the men were better horsemen than I was, and probably 2/3 of them better shots than I was, while on the average they were certainly hardier and more enduring. Yet after I had had them a very short while, they all knew, and I knew too, that nobody else could command them as I could. I am glad you should play football. I am glad that you should box. I am glad that you should ride and shoot and walk and row as well as you do. I should be very sorry if you do not do these things. But don't ever get into the frame of mind which regards these things as constituting the end to which all your energies must be devoted, or even the major portion of your energies. Yes, I'm going to speak at Groton on Prize Day. I felt that while I was president, while you and Kermit were at Groton, I wanted to come up there and see you, and the rector wished me to speak, and so I am very glad to accept. By the way, I am working hard to get Renown accustomed to automobiles. He is such a handful now when he meets them that I seriously mind encountering them when Mother is along. Of course, I do not care if I'm alone or with another man, but I am uneasy all the time when I am out with Mother. Yesterday, I tried Bleistine over the hurdles at Chevy Chase. The first one was new, high and stiff, and the old rascal never rose 6 inches, going slap through it. I took him at it again, and he went over all right. I am very busy now, facing the usual endless worry and discouragement, and trying to keep steadily in mind that I must not only be as resolute as Abraham Lincoln in seeking to achieve decent ends, but as patient, as uncomplaining, and as even-tempered in dealing not only with knaves, but with well-meaning foolish people, educated and uneducated, who by their unwisdom give the knaves their chance. From the White House, October 24th, 1903. Dear Ted, I am really greatly pleased at your standing so high in your form, and I am sure that this year is better for you to be playing where you are in football. I suppose next year you will go back to your position at end, as you would hardly be heavy enough for playing a back, or to play behind the center against teams with big fellows. I repeat that your standing in the class gives me real pleasure. I have sympathized so much with your delight in physical prowess, and have been so glad at the success you have had, that sometimes I have been afraid that I failed to emphasize sufficiently the fact that of course one must not subordinate study and work to the cultivation of such prowess. By the way, I'm sorry to say that I am falling behind physically. The last 2 or 3 years I've had a tendency to rheumatism or gout or something of the kind, which makes me very stiff. Renown is behaving better about automobiles and the like. I think the difference is largely in the way I handle him. He is a very good-natured and gentle horse, but timid and not over-wise, and when in a panic, his great strength makes him well-nigh uncontrollable. Accordingly, he is a bad horse to try to force by anything. If possible, it is much better to give him a little time, and bring him up as gently as may be to the object of terror. When he behaves well, I lean forward and give him a lump of sugar, and now the old boy eagerly puts his head around when I stretch out my hand. Bleistine and I have ridden very little, because I think one of his forelegs is shaky, and I want to spare him all I can. Mother and I have had the most lovely rides imaginable. A letter to his sister, Mrs. Douglas Robinson, from the White House, December 26, 1903. We had a delightful Christmas yesterday. Just such a Christmas 30 or 40 years ago we used to have under Father and Mother's supervision in 20th Street and 57th Street. At 7, all the children came in to open the big, bulgy stockings in our bed. Kermit's terrier, Alan, a most friendly little dog, adding to the children's delight by occupying the middle of the bed. From Alice to Quentin, each child was absorbed in his or her stocking, and Edith certainly managed to get the most wonderful stocking toys. Bob was in looking on, and Aunt Emily, of course. Then, after breakfast, we all formed up and went into the library, where bigger toys were on separate tables for the children. I wonder whether there can ever come in life a thrill of greater exultation and rapture than that which comes to one between the ages of, say, 6 and 14, when the library door is thrown open and you walk in to see all the gifts, like a materialized fairyland, arrayed on your special table. From the White House, January 18th, 1904. Dear Kermit, Thursday and Friday there was a great deal of snow on the ground, and the weather was cold, so that Mother and I had 2 delightful rides up Rock Creek. The horses were clipped and freshed, and we were able to let them go along at a gallop, while the country was wonderfully beautiful. Today, after lunch, Mother took Ethel, Archie, and Quentin, each with a friend, to see some most wonderful juggling and sleight-of-hand tricks by Kellar. I went along and was as much interested as any of the children, though I had to come back to work in the office before it was half through. At one period, Ethel gave up her ring for one of the tricks. It was mixed up with the rings of 5 other little girls, and then all 6 rings were apparently pounded up and put into a pistol and shot into a collection of boxes, where 5 of them were subsequently found, each tied to a rose. Ethel's, however, had disappeared, and he made believe that it had vanished. But at the end of the next trick, a remarkable bottle, out of which many different liquids had been poured, suddenly developed a delightful white guinea pig, squirming and kicking and looking exactly like Admiral Dewey, with around its neck Ethel's ring, tied by a pink ribbon. Then it was wrapped up in a paper, handed to Ethel, and when Ethel opened it, behold, there was no guinea pig, but a bunch of roses with a ring. From the White House, February 27th, 1904. Dear Kermit, Mother went off for 3 days to New York, and Mame and Quentin took instant advantage of her absence to fall sick. Quentin's sickness was surely due to a riot in candy and ice cream with chocolate sauce. He was a very sad bunny next morning and spent a couple of days in bed. Ethel, as always, was as good as gold to both him and to Archie, and largely relieved me of my duties as vice mother. I got up each morning in time to breakfast with Ethel and Archie before they started for school, and I read a certain amount to Quentin, but this was about all. I think Archie escaped with a minimum of washing for the 3 days. One day I asked him before Quentin how often he washed his face, whereupon Quentin interpolated, "Very seldom, I fear," which naturally produced from Archie violent recriminations of a strongly personal type. Mother came back yesterday, having thoroughly enjoyed Parsifal. All the horses continue sick. From the White House, May 28th, 1904. Dear Ted, I am having a reasonable amount of work and rather more than a reasonable amount of worry. But, after all, life is lovely here. The country is beautiful, and I do not think that any 2 people ever got more enjoyment out of the White House than Mother and I. We love the house itself, without and within, for its associations, for its stillness and its simplicity. We love the garden, and we like Washington. We almost always take our breakfast on the south portico now, Mother looking very pretty and dainty in her summer dresses. Then we stroll about the garden for 15 or 20 minutes, looking at the flowers and the fountain and admiring the trees. Then I work until between 4 and 5, usually having some official people to lunch. Now a couple of senators, now a couple of ambassadors, now a literary man, now a capitalist or a labor leader, or a scientist, or a big game hunter. If Mother wants to ride, then we spend a couple of hours on horseback. We had a lovely ride up on the Virginia shore since I came back, and yesterday went up Rock Creek and swung back home by the roads, where the locust trees were most numerous, for they are now white with blossoms. It is the last great burst of bloom which we shall see this year except the laurels. But there are plenty of flowers in bloom or just coming out, the honeysuckle most conspicuously. The south portico is fragrant with that now. The jasmine will be out later. If we don't ride, I walk or play tennis. But I am afraid Ted has gotten out of his father's class in tennis. From the White House, December 3rd, 1904. Blessed Kermit. The other day, while Major Leffler was marshalling the usual stream of visitors from England, Germany, the Pacific slope, etc., of warm admirers from remote country places, of bridal couples, etc., etc., a huge man about 6'4", of middle age, but with every one of his great sinews and muscles as fit as ever, came in and asked to see me on the ground that he was a former friend. As the line passed, he was introduced to me as Mr. White. I greeted him in the usual rather perfunctory manner, and the huge, rough-looking fellow shyly remarked, "Mr. Roosevelt, maybe you don't recollect me. I worked on the roundup with you 20 years ago next spring. My outfit joined yours at the mouth of the Box Elder." I gazed at him and at once said, "Why, it is Big Jim." He was a great cow-puncher and is still riding the range in northwestern Nebraska. When I knew him, he was a tremendous fighting man, but he always liked me. Twice I had to interfere to prevent him from half murdering cowboys from my own ranch. I had him at lunch with a mixed company of home and foreign notabilities. Don't worry about the lessons, old boy. I know you are studying hard. Don't get cast down. Sometimes in life, both at school and afterwards, fortune will go against anyone. But if he just keeps pegging away and doesn't lose his courage, things always take a turn for the better in the end. The end for this week's Reading Aloud. I hope you all have a very good week.